Hello, I'm Rachel Richards, former BBC correspondent, parenting coach, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 older stepdaughters.
Hi, I'm Susie Asley, mindfulness instructor, psychotherapist, musician and mother of 3 teenagers. 2 of them are twins.
Now, Susie, in the UK, everyone is back to school. Yay! But it hasn't been long since they received their GCSEs, right? And in the UK, GCSEs, A-levels, baccalaureate grades, those are the important exams, aren't they?
Yeah,
Before you
exams.
GCSEs, then it's A-levels or baccalaureate, and then you go on to university. It's a great time to be talking about Gaelle's question, which is how to discuss jobs and careers with our teens.
Yes.
And just whether the exam results were acceptable, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, we'll cover that in the second half. But first, we've had more great feedback.
Yeah, which is really lovely. I've got one here. So it's from Tareen, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, in Cape Town, who says the episode on pornography was excellent. She spoke to her daughters about it, who said that their boyfriends watch every day and are very open about it with each other. Apparently, some of the boys with girlfriends have already said that they don't find the girlfriends that attractive after a few months. Could pornography be the cause?
It's a really good point.
Really
and I mean, I don't think we can answer that accurately, but we do need to be thinking about these things, which is why we did cover it. Yeah. Eve told us that one of her great fears is that her 2 teenagers will be sent images on their phones that they shouldn't have to see. She said, listening to you both with your words of wisdom, both from research and experience, was greatly reassuring and gave me the tools to chat to my 2. She's thinking of telling them to listen to the podcast without her, but there are just a few things that she'd rather they didn't hear. So I'm just actually, Susie, I was wondering whether, perhaps our listeners can tell us whether it would be worth re-editing that to take out the more extreme bits so that people could then download it to let their teenagers listen. Because that's the feedback we're getting, that actually people would quite like their teenagers just to step away and just say, here, listen to this.
We've been asked, actually, I was out in my local town with my daughter and somebody recognised me, which was mortifying for my daughter. It was so funny. She went, I listened to your podcast.
Global superstar.
And my daughter just went, oh my God. But she said,
I'm not her daughter.
It's so funny. She asked my daughter if she listened to the podcast, and Emily went, no. But we had a discussion about it, and she was really curious and was wanting her daughter to listen to it, actually. So definite food for thought. What others think of it, that'd be interesting to hear. Yeah,
I'd love to hear. If there are any that you think, I'd like my kids to listen to this, but perhaps there are things in it that we wouldn't want them to hear.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's a whole load of other editing. But I'm prepared to do it if people feel like it might be useful.
So
topics, something perhaps to think about. Yeah. Now, Louise has asked us to talk about one of the things that can put a huge strain on the relationship, coping with a different parenting style from your own, and the children not knowing where their boundaries are as a result. So, Susie, you have a new partner, which is really interesting. And the big question is, you've got another adult around. How easy has it become in terms of parenting?
Well, to say we don't live together, so we see each other, regularly, but we're not living together.
But your children have met him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Lots and lots of times. We've been on holiday together this summer. I think the biggest difference, because we're not parenting, we have teenagers, they're not little. It would be different if they were little. We're not parenting each other's kids by any stretch of the imagination. I would call it more of a support, which is really, really valuable. Support for you as a parent. So I have a person, a space. I can talk to him about anything that I'm, anything about the teenagers.
And of course, because he's a parent as well,
yeah,
he can relate.
Yes, absolutely. And his kids are the same age as mine, just by coincidence. So that's really helpful. But it's probably more the support side, which is really valuable. And it shows me the contrast of I've been doing this on my own for years, and it's very different. I think my kids really value having him around. They've all said that in various ways, and he'll talk to them and feel the support of that. He doesn't have responsibility for them, so it's different.
Yes, it's different. And it's a really interesting one, because I suppose having somebody there who you can just unpack some of the questions with is really, really important. And you underestimate it when we're in a happy, healthy relationship. Yes. But I imagine if you're in a relationship where you have somebody who really doesn't see things the same way as you, it can feel worse than not having someone with you.
Yes, it can feel like a constant constant friction, I think, and quite a burden.
Yes. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of preamble because I've been thinking about this topic for quite a while. And I suppose the first thing I'd want to start with was when I was a teenager, I remember clearly saying to my mother, what would you say if I announced that I wanted to marry somebody of a different skin colour to us? I mean, bear in mind, this is 40 years ago. My mother said, yeah, I don't really care. She said, what I'm much more interested in is what's his culture and would it be similar to ours? And I thought, whoa, that's really profound and quite thought-provoking. So I didn't say anything more about it, but my goodness, it stuck with me. So remember this as a parent, you can drop little tablets into the water and they fizz and you may not see anything happening, but they can really stay with your teens. So I then kept thinking, so what is that? What is that culture? And I think culture is one of those things that we don't really know until we come up against another culture.
Absolutely.
It's the fabric that we live in.
Yeah, and culture can be many things. We have like national culture, we have local culture, but we have a family culture. Like we have there's a sibling culture. The word culture is amazing. I studied social anthropology, so that's really topical. So get me up on that. It's fascinating.
Well, it is a really interesting thing. But I read the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and it's all about how our brains work to actually consider things that we find new and difficult. We have to switch into a different track, which is a slow thinking track. Yeah. But most of our life is spent in the fast thinking track. Yes. So you're driving a car, you don't think about driving a car. Once you've actually learned how to do it, you're sort of load shedding.
You're in autopilot.
Autopilot, exactly, whatever you want to refer to it as. And in many ways, we parent in that way. We don't really think too much about some of the things we're doing because you can't. I mean, we're too busy. There are too many other things happening. You know, I'm not going to keep thinking, oh, how does this work? And what you sort of just fall back on what you found comfortable or what you learnt.
Yeah, we're not conscious about it. Yeah, our culture, to come back to the word of culture, you're absolutely right. We only realise our culture when we're met
confronted with something awful.
Something that's different. Yes. Yeah, or something that's new. It could be positive, it could be negative, but it is a contrast. And
I then thought about my friend who married a Catholic and she converted to Catholicism. And in order to go through the wedding, she had to go through a program with him of a weekly meeting with the priest to talk about a topic. So one of them would be sex, one would be money, one would be, your religious values, your family, your children, you name it. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting one. But actually, she said it was the most valuable thing.
Yeah, I bet.
Because these are things we sort of think we know about our partner.
Yeah.
But we don't, unless you're given a checklist. Yeah. Do you really go through all of that?
Yeah, no.
Before you have children?
Because we're so in love, everything will be fine.
I know. And we just, you've got this massive rug that you just sweep everything under when it doesn't seem quite right just yet. Absolutely. And we'll deal with that later. And actually, it's not such a big thing. And I can tolerate it, doesn't matter.
And we're massive creatures of comfort. So we stay with what we know, even when we're aware that it's not very good for us. We'll keep doing what we know.
Good point. Yes. I'm guilty of that myself. Yeah. So the main disagreements tend to be about rules.
Yeah.
Whether you're, are we going to be harsh? Are we going to be more relaxed about it? We covered making rules in episode 14 and talked about unpacking the way you were parented as well, because that's another thing that's really important here. We did that right in the very first episode. So if you haven't listened to that, it might be worth just going back and having a quick, it's quite a short one, because it's just, reflecting on the way that you were brought up and how that might be impacting on the way that you're dealing with your current situation. And the truth of it is that we mostly parent reactively.
Yes.
So the Holy Grail, apparently according to Alan Ravitz, who's an adolescent psychiatrist and has been practicing with families over 30 years, the Holy Grail is providing a united front as parents.
Yeah.
Which isn't really always that easy.
No.
And the key things are things like, as we said, it's discipline. The difficulty is when somebody starts hogging one side of the parenting. So it's the good cop, bad cop. Yeah. So one person is the discipline person and the other person's the fun person.
Yeah.
So this is a very, very common setup in a household.
Yeah.
And it does cause friction, whether people are being honest about the friction or not.
Yeah.
The bad cop probably doesn't want to be the bad cop all the time. And the good cop's probably quite enjoying being a good cop, but might be looking at the bad cop thinking,
it's unbalanced.
So, yes. And so, for example, one woman said, my husband is very harsh about schoolwork, discipline, and he thinks that I'm too lax, and he gets really annoyed with me because he thinks that I'm too soft and kind. And she said, the thing is, I don't disagree with some of the things he thinks, but he's left me no room because he's the person that's doing so much of it. I feel there needs to be some balance.
Yeah, and that's the key to all of it, isn't it? It's the communication, because I think kids are really able to differentiate. Maybe not so much when they're little, and it's really important that it's united, but by the time they get to be teenagers, they're recognizing that we are human beings, people, and we have our own opinions about stuff, and I think they can navigate quite well when parents give different rules, especially if maybe they don't live in the same house. But even if they live in the same house, there are different rules, or mum does that, dad does that. I think they're really quite good at navigating that. But it depends how it's done and what it's done about, I guess. But if it's done in a really undramatic, calm way, this I just have a different opinion, and this is how I roll, and that's how dad rolls, and that's fine with me, then it's okay. But if there's disagreement and friction on it, then I think that's really difficult for the teens, because that's a whole different ball game.
I love that. It's about respect, isn't it? It's about, we don't agree.
Yeah.
And actually there's one of the psychologist, Laura Marshak, who said, actually, it's a good thing in some way to be a little bit inconsistent, because life is like that. Yeah. So if you can show to your teens that, there isn't an obvious one way of doing this, and that we can have discussions about it. When it falls apart is when it's disrespectful. Yeah,
and if they can, they can witness you having a discussion with each other, going, oh, I don't agree with you on that. Why do you think that? And let's have a look at it, and let's be flexible and maybe negotiate. What an amazing learning platform for a teenager to watch and see, how do you do that? But if it's done in a sort of a passive aggressive, you're wrong and I'm right.
He's a dick.
Yeah, exactly. Then all the teen will probably think is, oh, there's some nice leverage there. I'm just going to ask when dad's gone out of the room or when mum's gone out of the room, and that's, maybe not the best way.
No, exactly. And they are very good at spotting these things. So and the big stress points tend to be, as we said, it's rule making. Yeah. And the problem with it is that if you set a rule and your partner chooses a different rule or a non-rule, then obviously they're going to go to the non-rule. They're going to find the easiest thing for them. And a lack of consistency in that way it leads to teens then constantly pushing the boundaries. Because if you say, here's my rule and here's how it has to work, and then they find a way around it, either by so they've done something wrong. You've said, right, the thing that you're going to have to do now, it's not punishment, but here's the consequence. And then, and you say it's a week of not using the PlayStation. And 3 days in, they've been so fantastic. You say, oh, actually, it's fine. Just have the PlayStation. Well, now what you've done is you've negotiated what the deal is. Or if your partner then says, actually, it's not, I don't think it was that bad. You use it. What you've actually done is you've told them that there are rules, but they're completely up for grabs. Yeah. So you just have to, manipulate as much as you like. They'll see how you do it, and then they'll work their way around it. And again, you could say, well, I'm teaching them good skills for life. You're also teaching them how to make your life hell. And it doesn't really make for, an easy household, particularly when other people in the household, other children, siblings are seeing this, because they're all watching. Yeah. Every single, you may not think they are, but they are watching. And if they see one child getting away with something, they're totally they're mopping that up, and it's all going to come back.
I do, I totally agree. And I really think this topic, as in most of the topics we've covered, but this one particularly, maybe it really falls back to how we are as parents. It's not really about the kids, this one at all. They navigate as they do, and sometimes they're opportunistic and do whatever they need to do, but it's really about our communication skills with our partners, whether we live together or not. How do we manage that? And that is critical, and we have to again try and be really adult and be really cool about it. And we can have disagreements. We don't have to agree on everything. Goodness,
No, we won't. You won't. I mean, I don't agree with my husband on quite a few things, and he knows. But the real stress points tend to be things like diagnoses of problems, like any kind of psychiatric diagnoses, learning disability, drug treatment. When those decisions need to be made, it can be very, very difficult, because one may say, I don't think our teenager needs drugs. The other may say, yes, but I've spoken to this specialist who thinks they should. And the only way you can test that, who's right, is by doing maybe 6 months with one way of doing things and 6 months with the other. You literally, one of you is going to have to say, okay, well, I don't think that that's the way to do it, but let's try one way.
Yeah.
And on the basis that if it's not working, then we do the other thing.
Yes.
You kind of have to come into an agreement. But the question
comes back to then your own communication skills, doesn't it, with your partner?
Absolutely. So coming back to down to the crux of it, how do we do this? Because we've talked a lot about how do we do this. Now, Amy McCready is the founder of Positive Parenting Solutions, and I've put a link to her website on the podcast notes because she's got a fantastic piece about this. And actually, she's using a similar technique to the one we used in Parent Gym when I was coaching. And I tell you now, it was life-changing. It was really, really helpful for my relationship.
Oh, interesting.
So, we talk about parenting and how it will help the children. Well, whatever. It actually helps you talk better with your partner.
Which helps the children.
Which helps the children, yes. So, number one, find common ground, any common ground. So you're thinking, well, we don't agree on this. All right, well, let's find something that we both agree on.
Yeah.
And be honest about the good things that they do, like the fact that they're encouraging, they play with the kids, whatever they do, say, I love that you do this.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a shit sandwich thing, but it's kind of, okay, let's start off with the positives about the person.
But that actually does make a difference.
It really does make a difference if people are noticed. If people are noticed, if people are, I mean, honestly, even now, if somebody says something positive to me, I'm still like, oh, actually, and then the hell comes afterwards. But it's as long as it's sincere, it's meaningful, and it really makes a difference. So, start with that. Then explore the underlying reasons why you disagree, and what you need to do is you need to say, okay, my parenting decisions. So I don't agree with the bedtime that you've chosen. I think the kids should be up later. I think they should be allowed to do what they want. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay, so then sit down and say, right, so how was it at your home when you were a teenager? Were your parents really strict about it? Or were you allowed to just run riot? How did that work? Okay, it was different for me. And, try and pick apart, where did this come from? This concept that you think they should stay up all night and the other person saying, they really need to be in bed by this time.
Yeah, and try and get out of black and white thinking that we're really good at, right and wrong, you're wrong, I'm right, because that's really unhelpful.
Yes, so rather than just start the sentence with, that's really interesting. So where did that, where's your thinking come from? Just start picking away at it. Oh, and what else? And what else? How does that make you feel when I say, I think it should be this way? And why?
Yeah, it's more respectful, and then there's more opportunities to have a discussion and find a solution that works for everybody, or try stuff out.
Absolutely. So our first episode went into this a bit, what parts of your childhood influence how you feel about your partner's parenting techniques, all those things, and start small.
Yeah.
Don't think you're going to fix it. If you're at loggerheads with your partner, because it happens, and it might have been going on for a very long time. In fact, if you've got teenagers, it probably has.
Yeah.
So don't expect it to be fixed overnight, but agree to do this, and then to start small and say, okay, so what are the non-negotiables in the way that we feel about our children? So there may be things like health and safety rules. Wearing bike helmets, for example, driving, having drunk alcohol, just things where you can say, okay, it's a definite non-negotiable. And then areas of family value. When does the homework get done? How is respect shown in the home? Just find something that you can both say, actually, I really think we're happy with that. We both agree.
Yeah, and picking your battles, like not everything is worth dying over, is it?
Nope, exactly.
In fact, most things aren't worth dying over.
Most things aren't. So, and actually, if they feel strongly about something and you're quite, I don't know, you can trade. Yeah. You can say, actually, I'll give you, that's okay. I'm not that bothered, but this thing really matters to me, and here's why. I've thought about it, and here's why. Yeah. And I think it's the expression of why that's the most important thing. Because when I explain to my husband why I think something, he often goes, oh, okay, I can see that. It's fine.
And when you discuss stuff is super important. Like, don't discuss when you've just fallen out.
And by the way, your parenting sucks.
Yeah, or you've just had an argument with the teen, and you've realised
yes.
that there's a conflict of information going on in the home, and you've just realised that this, and that's maybe really annoying. Then you just wait, sit with it, and don't.
Yeah, I love that point, because that's really the time when it would flare up, where the teen's been a complete nightmare, and then you've had a screaming match with the teen, and then you turn to the partner and you think it's all your fault because you let them. Yeah, no, that's not the time. That's not the time. Very good point.
And also, what's going on in your relationship in general? Because I know for myself, if I'm, just in our home, like the four of us, like the me and the kids, like if everything's really cool and everyone's happy, then the things that we disagree on, they don't really seem very important. But if there's other stuff going on, or there's, that could be work, it could be a million different things, then the little nitty gritty things suddenly are really big.
Yes, we talked about this earlier, because you have had a tree come down and you were saying, haven't been coping well. But we were talking about how it's the micro stresses throughout a day that can add up to you not coping with something that actually it shouldn't be that big a deal. But it's because of all the little things during the day you've had to deal with that were really... Yeah.
And that's where awareness kicks in, that we've talked about so many times. Because like you said, I had some stuff this morning. They were all quite minor things, quite annoying things, but minor things. And I was about to sit down and reground myself, because I know how to do that. How do I get back to feeling good again and feeling in balance? And then I looked out the window and lightning had struck a very large willow tree in our garden, and
why me?
and has completely killed it. So I didn't get that opportunity, but that's so that became an addition rather than as an opportunity to sit and reground. But it's really important that we know how to, where is our balance point as parents, as adults, how can we get back to feeling regulated? Where's our regulation point?
And try to have those discussions when you're feeling regulated. And that's one of the points, is actually pick a regular time. If you've been having friction, say, you know what, we're going to do these things. And then why don't we try and do a kind of weekly, bi-weekly, sit down and chat and say, where are we now? How are we feeling about this? Is it working? And
maybe use a timer if you're talking to a boy, like I do.
And then thinking long term. So the step 4 in this whole program is just actually, you've talked about starting small. We've talked about picking things, exploring reasons why you've got problems with each other anyway. But think long term about what you're trying to achieve, because you have a teenager here. What attributes do you hope your children will possess when they can become adults? So then we're not talking about nitty gritty.
Yeah, I like that. That's really good.
We're not saying, I think they should do this, they should do that. Actually, so if we want them to be this, if we want them to be responsible adults, how important is it for them to be getting that early night's sleep? Or if we want them to be compassionate people, so just look for some key words that you both agree on, and then say, okay, so how do these various things we have in place feed into making that happen?
Yeah, I think often the conflict can be, not always, but some of the conflicts can be, how much freedom should our teenagers have? How much are you letting go? How much are you holding on? And that can be really difficult, because that ties in with all of our own stuff, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? Our own fears, our own worries, our own thoughts about
And if you break down, okay, so I'm going to give them more freedom. What am I trying to get from that? What are they trying to, what am I trying to give them?
Yeah.
And if you can, because then that helps you to express better what the issues are.
Yes. Yeah. And as you say, like a long-term picture. So if you're letting them choose when they go to bed, for example, which I think most teenagers would be doing, they might be tired tomorrow. That's a short-term thing. Whereas in the long term, maybe you're teaching them to manage their time, or maybe that particular child can't, whatever the particular situation is. Yeah, the short and the long term can be different goals.
And don't disagree in front of your teenager.
Yeah.
If you can help it. So, and coming back to what we said earlier, yes, you can sit there and say, oh, that's interesting that you see it that way. I see it slightly differently. And you can have a respectful conversation in front of them, because this is a good way of unpacking how you come to some resolution. And, if you can do that. If you can't do that, don't.
Yes.
So you need a non-verbal signal that says, time out.
Yeah.
So that you just park that issue, talk about it at some other point, come back to it later. And you need to have agreed that. Yeah. So once someone shows that signal, it's right, we're just going to stop there.
That's really important, because you can have a respectful way, can't you? Say, I hear what you're saying and I completely disagree with you, and that can be super respectful.
Yes.
But if it isn't, then no, don't.
Yes. And they really don't shy away from conflict, in the sense that I was listening to a podcast recently where they were talking about how Gen Z really struggles with conflict, and that there's more of a tendency to just, well, I'm not getting paid enough, I'll just hand in my notice, rather than going in and saying, right, so I've got this experience, how do I get to the point where you will give me a raise?
That's
right?
Really interesting.
And it's really, really important that we're teaching our kids that they can have these conversations, they can be difficult, but not to think that it's the end of the world when you have to have one of those conversations.
Absolutely. My eldest has got a bit smart on that. I've noticed recently, I'll ask him to do something that maybe a year ago he'd have kicked off about, and now he just goes, oh yeah, of course, no problem, and then doesn't do it.
And you think, oh, I love him,
he's grown up. And then I'm like, oh,
right,
still doesn't know. He's very smart.
So avoiding the good cop, bad cop, avoiding saying, so when your dad gets home, he's going to be furious that you did. Come on, let's not do that. That's really old-fashioned parenting, but it's not fair.
No.
It's not fair getting one person to do those tricky things. Again, because let's not nobody wants to be pigeonholed.
No. And if you're the only parent, then you have to do both, which really sucks.
I know, I can imagine. I've never been in
cop.
That. No, but that's what being a grandparent is. Okay. I keep saying to my kids, it sucks being a parent because I've got to take all of this stuff seriously, but you wait. When you've got children, you're going to hate me because I am going to spoil them so much.
Oh, we've had those conversations too. I can't wait.
Exactly. That's got to be the fun about it. And then, committing to the consistent communication, right? We're going to have let's have a time when we check in, regular time when we check in. And if none of this is working, and it's still a real, your partner's not prepared to sit down and go through this process, finds that they're really struggling with communicating about how they're feeling about what's happened. Maybe they had a childhood that they're finding very hard to talk about. That's the time to go and seek some support, because the truth is, when we do seek support, it's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that if you can get someone to get you together and hold your hand while you walk through this process, some people need it. Yeah,
and sadly, we still see that kind of help, whether it's therapy or just some sort of, I don't know, help, like a meeting with somebody who's an expert in it, family help. We still sometimes see that as, a bit taboo and a bit of that must mean that I've really messed up. And it's not. It should be available to everybody, because there are people who know how to help.
Yes, and accepting that if you've got one culture in your background and you've got another culture in your background, sometimes it's very, very hard to see beyond, what's coming out emotionally, and you just need someone to get you over that fence.
And a professional is an expert in communication and can just help both sides have what they need to say on the table, and then it's really normally quite easy to resolve. But if you don't have it on the table, you can't resolve it.
It's impossible to resolve. So I hope that helps. We all disagree with our partners at some point. It's human to view things differently. Yes. It's all about finding a way to communicate so that you aren't undermining each other. That's with all of this. It's all about just how am I saying this in a way that's supporting the process of trying to find a resolution. Yeah,
and it's really tempting. I think especially if you are not together, if you're living in separate homes, and there's a reason why you're not in the same home.
I'm sure there's a reason.
It can be really tempting if you disagree on some fundamentals for that to be a really big point of resentment, and that's really unhelpful for the kids. And it's probably going to mean that there's two homes, there's two cultures are very different, and there are different rules, and maybe that's just how it is. But if you can keep the respect, that's really cool.
And so these points that I went through, to what extent do you think, when you have got two homes that probably will be run in different ways, that can help?
Yeah, I mean, I say to my kids, if they've said, why do we have to do that there? And or Dad lets us do that, or, whatever it is, it can go both ways. And we don't have a conversation about these things. Sadly, I wish we did, but we don't. And I'm sure a lot of people are in that boat. I always say, I don't know the reason. I don't know why. But I'm sure there's a good reason for it. I don't know what it is. But trying to keep this sort of underlying that's also okay, and I don't agree with it. I think they seem to manage both. There are, I try and see the silver linings in these things because that's helpful. It does teach them, if we go back to culture, it does teach them that there are different ways of living. And as long as it can be done in a way that isn't super confusing, I think it's actually can be a gift, because otherwise we just go through our childhood and our early adulthood thinking there's only one way to live, and then panicking when not everyone does what we do.
That's such a good point. Such a good point. If you found our podcast useful, do us a favour, click subscribe or even review us and tell your friends. Our website now has everything in one place, so feel free to rummage around there and message us with any of your questions or tips for topics to cover. You can also reach us via our Facebook group or Instagram. We read everything. Now, Susie, you've had one son go through the exam process during COVID, and he was marked by his school teachers, I think, on the basis of what they thought he could attain if he were to have sat exams.
He did do exams in his particular school, but they were internal. Okay. Subjects were smaller than normal. I think the syllabuses were cut, but he did sit exams, but they were marked by teachers.
Yes. So I think I mentioned that just because we sort of have kind of forgotten COVID, but it actually is still really having an impact on our teenagers. Yeah. And he's in his second year of A-levels. Now, A-levels are the ones you do before you go to university. Yeah. And so obviously it's an important year for university applications and for deciding what he wants to do with the rest of his life. How is that going? How has that felt?
That's quite topical in our home at the moment. And because he's in this, and he wouldn't mind me saying this, I've asked him. His first year, he went to a sixth form college. He's at a sixth form college. And he did really well in his GCSEs on very little work, which was very fortunate for him. But he's done the classic, and we spoke about it. You found that easy. Make sure you don't just do nothing for your sixth form, because it's going to be harder. And he, for different reasons, hasn't done as well as he hoped he would. So he's now got what we would call predicted grades, which is what he can use to apply to university, and they're not as high as he would have liked. And his college has been should we say, not very flexible. But that's a whole different story. So I'm really sitting in that at the moment. I say because I think I'm probably more annoyed about it than he is. And it's really made me think about the whole system, the whole way we look at this time of our teenagers' lives. And I'm really practicing with it, actually, which even today, the idea of, what is my stuff when I get triggered in this? What's my fear of what's he gonna do? What's he gonna, who's he gonna be when he's finished school? And what's his?
And I think your fear is the most important thing here, isn't it?
It's so important that we look at that, because so much of it is such nonsense. And going back to, our culture, what do we think is important? Because his choices now are limited, and I have totally come to the understanding that he's going to be absolutely fine, and maybe he'll go a different route. I've no idea what will happen, but I think what triggers us and triggers us as human beings is we don't like uncertainty. We don't like not knowing.
Love that.
Especially with our own kids. And we have this idea that if we can just make sure that they're, go off on the right path and a success, whatever on earth we mean by that, then we can breathe again and it'll be all right. It'll be okay. So if they say, I want to be, I don't know, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, a doctor, or I know how to get them to be a doctor. We can follow that path and then it'll be all right. But for, that's nonsense. Wouldn't it be better to learn to live with uncertainty and live with the discomfort of uncertainty? Because nobody knows at the age of 17 what they want to do. Well, very few do. And that's okay.
That's okay. Yes. And I think that it's a very important point that you're making about the fear. And I think it's both fear and pride. Parents wanting to be able to show that they've done this amazing job with their kids. You talked about this when we were talking about education and how, if you are patting yourself on the back that your child has been getting X grades, what happens when they don't? Or what happens when they get to, post-grad and they decide that they can't cope anymore and and then what does that make you?
Yeah. Just if they veer off this really stupidly narrow path that we've created of being a good teenager, student, kid, whatever you want to call it, then if they veer off that, then we go, oh, we must have parented them badly, and we take it as a badge. It's crazy.
Now, it was Gaelle who asked us to talk about this. And so, I looked at the research, and according to a report published by Dell Technologies and authored by the Institute for the Future and a panel of 20 tech companies and academic experts from around the world, 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 haven't been invented yet. That's amazing. I mean, I'm not sure how they came up with that number, but that's mind-boggling. Yeah. But it's not completely inaccurate. I mean, so I read a fascinating book called Thank You for Being Late, which was so, a real think piece about this generation and this world we're living in. And he talks a lot about the age of acceleration and how things just keep getting faster. The turnaround time for getting a smaller TV that does more is it's sped up, and it keeps speeding up, and these things are changing really, really rapidly. Yes. And our education system is creaking.
Archaic.
It doesn't. Yes, it's just. But we don't really know how to make it better, so we just keep going with what we're doing. And the truth is, we have the liberal arts education is sort of there to help our kids figure out what they're good at and what they can do well. And I keep saying to my kids, what you really need to learn is how to work hard. And whatever it is you're working hard at is slightly less material than the fact that you're prepared to really apply yourself and get through problems, because it's problem solving.
It's resilience, isn't it?
It's resilience, it's problem solving. Like, how do I go from, and again, looking at things that have happened in the past may not be that instructive, but just take my husband, who got into Oxford to read maths, but then panicked and said, I think I'll hit a wall. So read law because he thought, I'd like to be a barrister. And then realised that he hates the law, it's boring, and doesn't want to be a barrister. And then, came out of university and did something completely different. Yeah. And the point being that we can get a training that looks superficially very, so he could have been going down that track to be a barrister. But at any point in your education or in your life, you may realise, because you've started to really think about who you are, you've met new people, you've had more experience, you think, oh, actually, no, this is who I am.
Yeah. I'm trying to take away the bullshit stress, which I would define as the unnecessary stress, the stress that just makes them fearful and worried that they're not going to be good enough, that they're going to fail, which is never helpful for anybody. But on the other hand, I was trying to explain, don't just do nothing, because if you just stay in your comfort zone and not work and go, well, I'm not going to stress, that's dull. And everything interesting is on the other side of our comfort zone.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's getting that balance, because we don't want to say, right, you have to work really hard, whatever the price, and, encourage them to be burnt out and when they're 25. Find what makes you tick. What do you like doing? And don't worry if you're not super good in school, because that only judges a really narrow way of thinking.
No, and my friend has set up a business, and she said, look at me. I mean, you don't need a degree to do this at all.
No, only logical science, thinking is valued. All the other things aren't really valued. So.
And when you look at my bonus daughter, she did GCSEs. She was a bit lackluster about studying, and then she had met a friend who became a really great friend, who was Russian, and then decided to take a Russian A-level. She was lucky enough to be in a school where she learnt it, then ended up doing a Russian degree. But the whole time we kept saying, so what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Because we were seeing people coming out of the course who just weren't getting jobs.
Yeah.
And she followed her networks. She talked to lots of people, found a job that really isn't advertised and something that really made her heart sing. And now she's flying.
Amazing.
I mean, really flying.
Amazing.
And that's because she just followed her passions. Now, obviously, not everything is going to work out easily. But when do you judge somebody? What is it when they're 20? Or is it when they're 30? When are you successful? The point is we evolve as we go on through life. So
if we can feel that we're in alignment with who we are, and maybe ask different questions like, what kind of person are you? Do you like being with people? Do you like being with animals? Are you a nurturer? Do you like teaching? Are you a thinker? Do you like new ideas? It's kind of encouraging them to think about themselves in that way rather than, are you good at physics? Are you good at are you good at maths?
So it's okay if they're really interested in that, but we need to be prepared to teach our kids to face uncertainty and be able to cope with it. Because as we know, with lockdown and COVID, and life can be very uncertain.
And it's mainly, I would think, and I'm not talking from any research, as our own uncertainty which we feed to the kids. Like, I'm not sure that the kids are really worrying about that until we tell them.
Yes, exactly. And then they might be doing really well, and then you start saying, well, what career are you going to have? And both my kids at certain points have said, so, well, I just don't know what I'm going to do, so what's the point? I need to know. And I keep trying to say to them, just can we not worry about that right now? Just focus on what interests you in the classroom.
Absolutely.
So how do we talk to our teens about their careers? So coming on to Gaelle's question, how do we talk to them? So the real conversations about this really need to start before the crunch point. So when it's all getting a bit fraught and they're trying to choose, it's harder because it's more stressful. So we need to get into a habit of having just flexible conversations about, so they used to do this in geography. Are they still doing that now? Just talking about the classes, what subjects they're studying, and then just seeing when their face lights up. Are they just going, or are they going, oh yeah, it's this and this, and then you think, okay, that's interesting. And those things will tell you what type of teenager you have. So once you see that they're animated about something, you can then say, oh, and you can start following that to just get them to open up a bit more. So you can do it in a relaxed way. Is your teenager a process-driven person, or do they like big picture strategic things? These are things that that's
really good to think
you can think about. And I was talking to my husband about this last night and saying, if you one test is you can just give a phone to a teenager and say, so what would you do with this? And I mean, the majority will probably,
TikTok.
They probably will. Okay, they might go on TikTok. They might make a phone call. They might
people don't call people anymore.
They don't call them anymore. But it would be nice if they did. But some people are communicators. They might take the phone apart. People, when you look at something, there's not one way of looking at it. So really a lot of people, or they might want to design a game on it, or they might want to game on it, or you may assume what you would do with that phone.
Or look at something beautiful and creative.
Exactly. They might start designing things. So you may know what you would do with that, but that's not necessarily what another person would want to do. So what are we dealing with here? Are they a very sort of close technical person? Do they like the nitty gritty of things? I looked at the other day when I was watching Big Vape that I keep talking about, and there's a lady there who basically was, she's in a lab and she's researching what's happening, and this happens with drug labs and things, and they spend all day researching this, and I just think, God, can you imagine being in a lab all day long? And I just couldn't do that.
No,
but there were people.
It's really exciting, probably.
Exciting, or maybe just something that they enjoy the process. And, that would just be torture for me. So some people are really communication driven. And you may not find that straight away. So my bonus daughter's friend, I think he studied physics as a degree, very smart boy, came out and said, I think I like advertising, did a postgrad in advertising, and now he is working just all the hours he can, because he's so good at what he does. The people in the agency are always asking for him.
And our kids are going to have, I think they're going to have different careers. They're not just going to have different jobs. They're going to have different careers. It's going to be totally different. So this idea that they need to find out what they want to do is actually utterly crazy.
Yes. So teaching them how to problem solve, how to deal with flexibility, how to make communications with people. Because very often when you talk to someone, you think, oh, that's a job. And it might be a job that you're interested in. Take their phone. I keep saying to my kids, if you meet someone they're interesting, get the phone number. Who knows?
You're very good at connecting. That's brilliant advice.
But I love that. I think, and we can now, with the social media that we've got, we can go on Instagram. I talk to people who are garden designers. I've never talked to a garden designer in my life. And we now can connect in ways that was impossible before. So teenagers have the opportunity to peer over the fence into different careers far more readily than they used to.
Which is really beautiful. And we can feed back to our kids, what we notice, but without pigeonholing. I think that has to be done really carefully, because if mum says I'm like this, then suddenly that becomes a label, and we don't want to do that. But just really gently sort of, I had a conversation with my daughter as one of those, lying in bed late at night, chatting with the light off. And she said, I don't know what I want to do or what I like. And we talked about it a bit. And I said, do you want me to share with you what I see you being good at, or what I notice? And she's like, oh yeah. and I did. And she's very, relational and very sort of nurturing.
Like a mum.
Yeah. And so it's like, she's amazing with our pets. Like she even goes, she times how long she pets them sometimes, because that's not fair. Otherwise, I'm not like that. No, but she's really kind, and she's great with kids. She's great, those kind of things which are not valued in the school system. Maybe it will be a comment at the end of the year or something, but it's not seen as being worthwhile. And that was a really lovely conversation. And then it made her think, oh yeah. And I also like that. And I also like that. And then we just left it. It's like, it's just a nice conversation, but it's feeding back, it's mirroring them, isn't it?
And slowly getting them to think about those things and get them to see the good in themselves.
Yes.
So that they can start focusing on what's interesting for them. And when it comes to, so there's a lady called Tamara Stevens, who's a licensed psychological associate, and she has a sort of strategy. So she says, instead of feeling locked into making a lifelong choice, the thing to do is to be looking at what the day-to-day tasks in certain jobs might be like. Because once you start picking apart a job, you'll have a much clearer understanding of whether it feels like something you'd like to do.
Yeah.
And so one of my daughters did say, I quite like looks great to be a barrister. So I took her along to one of our high courts, and she watched a murder trial, and I explained to her the difference between that type of a criminal barrister and a barrister that may focus on tax or whatever. And I said, that's just the tiny bit of their day, and here are the other things that they might be doing. Does that sound like something interesting? And you can start sort of picking apart the different things that people do, but you may not know.
That's a really good advice, because, of course, there's always going to be things with jobs that you don't like and you prefer. But if the bulk of it sounds amazing, that's good. But then if the bulk of it sounds actually not what you thought, then that's good to know. Yeah,
rather than following down a track that doesn't. So it's just about sort of, I suppose in a way, it's about putting them, putting them into situations where they might see jobs. So any adults that what do you do? What does your day look like? How does this feel? So that they can then start trying to picture it, and not picture them being in that job, picture them, that type of work, is that type of work appealing?
Yeah.
So and at the same time, start narrowing it down a bit.
And encourage them to sort of really find out who they are, what makes them tick, because then it's all awful lot easier. If you're in alignment with who you are, then it's much clearer.
Yes. And then the extracurriculars. So I know that there's an element of picking extracurriculars so that they look good on the CV. And I'm not going to say that people are wrong to do that, but I just think what a waste of life when your teenager wants to try something and there's another thing that might look better on the CV. You're a long time alive. Why not encourage them to follow the things that they find interesting? Because you don't know whether that thing might be the thing that then sparks the joy for them for the rest of their life. Yeah. So in a way, we have to trust our kids to go, okay, this is the thing that really matters to me, and just let them follow it.
That's a big part of unschooling, isn't it? On a completely different tack. But, let the kids know. You just have to give them the space to find out.
Yeah, yeah. And I've even contacted people on LinkedIn. I've messaged them on Twitter. And, just little things. So I see someone on Twitter and I thought their performance was great or their book was great or anything. And I just say, I loved this. Thank you so much. And sometimes you get people back.
That's so lovely. I don't do that.
And people, we don't give enough feedback. We don't tell people often enough when we appreciate something. And so you never know, because if I'm telling my kids, be more vocal. You see something good, feedback to them. And you may create a connection there that then, because it obviously resonated with you, well, move down that line.
At the very least, you're sending out really good karma into the world.
Exactly. Nothing wrong with that, hey? So, to stop the stress when you're getting to those really important points where they've got to make decisions, have a plan A, have a plan B. Don't just stick with one thing. The signs that they're suffering stress are headaches, poor sleep, changes in eating habits, always being tired, lacking energy or motivations. I've seen parents saying, my kid, they just can't be bothered to get out of bed. They're not doing, and that's a sign that they're stressed and they're overwhelmed and they're feeling like just don't know. Yeah, they just, if you've got to that point where because...
Yeah, no, it depends on what they're doing and whether if they need to be up and they're not, they're resisting.
Well, it's for example, I was talking to a relation who said it's when they've left that sort of main school that the problems start. Yeah. Because, she said that going from school to university or whatever, she said that was a massive leap, and that's where she found the real problem started.
Because the structure's gone.
Yeah, it just keeps going, guys.
Yeah, no, the structure is gone.
Yes. And so, and if they're finding it hard, then they may just want to stay in bed because actually it's a nicer place to be.
Yeah, or they just haven't looked down the long picture. I actually asked my eldest, who's going into his final school year, and he's at a college where the structure is very fluid, which he's been good and bad. And I said, well, what sort of, going into your final year, what sort of support would you like from me? You're getting older, you'll be going away next year possibly. And he was like, well, I'm going away probably next year. So if you can do as much as possible this year, because I'm going to have to do it all myself next year. I wasn't quite expecting that. I was thinking we could kind of...
A little bit of support. I wasn't talking about
I really
being
want to be
slave.
independent. I want to do that myself. I went, no, can you just do it all?
That's classic.
He's not going to get it all done.
I love it. Classic. So I think just summing it up, it's about making your teenager feel more comfortable with uncertainty, and making yourself feel more comfortable with uncertainty.
First step, yourself.
Yes.
Why is it such a big deal for you that your kid, what your kid's going to do?
Yeah.
And fear of failure as well, that, our kids are going to fail, and that is part of life.
And if they fail, they learn from that.
They do. It's important learning.
So in our next episode, we'll tackle an anonymous question. How do you handle dress codes with your teenage daughter? Ooh, the fashion trends these days seem to be as naked as possible. Am I the only one that doesn't want my daughter to wear shirts the size of a bra and shorts that are so short they look like underwear? No, you're not. The question is, what do you do about it? Also, Sarah has had to deal with a change in circumstances. A housing crisis where she lives has meant she's had to downsize, and it's impacted her teens. We'll look at ways in which she can discuss it with them and, just make it better. I don't know if you can make it better, but
it's really relevant right now.
Supporting them through that, because I think there's a cost of living crisis around the world. Yeah. So it's going to come up. Yeah. That's it for now. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Review us so that other people can find us more easily. Tell your friends and send us any questions that you have. We loved these ones. Thank you so much. You can also reach Susie via her own website, which is susieasleymindfulness.co.uk. All the links are in the podcast notes. Until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye for now.